California is holding its midterm primaries today with 20 races happening across the state. The historically liberal city of Los Angeles is due for a new mayor, and 2 Democrats have come out as frontrunners. Progressive Representative Karen Bass is neck and neck with businessman Rick Caruso, who was a registered Republican until this year. His expected success is as one of the 2 candidates to move on to the general election might signify a political shift in California. Tackling crime and homelessness are 2 issues important to voters in California this election season. Republicans in the 16 open primaries for House seats, are hoping their tougher stances on these issues will help shift the balance of power in the state and snatch up some more seats for the GOP. So CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is in that state and joins us now for more. Hey there, Ed. I like those palm trees behind you and the purple shirt for Election Day on cue. We know you've been spending a lot of time talking to the 2 frontrunners in this mayor's race. I want to start with Karen Bass, who a lot of people know as a congresswoman here in Washington. So why and how is she planning to try and trade the halls of Congress for City Hall?
Right. Well, in this case, Caitlin, both of these candidates focused on 2 big issues of concern for Angelenos: rising crime rates and the growing number of homeless people on the streets of the city. Both of them proposing ways to do this, one slightly more aggressive than the other. In the case of Karen Bass, she's a congresswoman, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, former Speaker of the California Assembly, who in 2020 was on the short list for serving as President Biden's running mate. You may recall, after he made the pledge to pick a woman and a black woman for the job. And in the years since, she's seen her profile rise here in the state and in Washington, but said the problems facing her hometown compelled her to think a bit about running for mayor. And we talked about that in our interview with her. You were considered by Joe Biden to be his running mate. There was talk of you either being appointed to or running for Kamala Harris's seat when she became vice president. Now you're running for mayor. First off, how did President Biden's vetting of you affect your profile here in the state? Probably helped, right?
Well, you know what, it did, but I will tell you something I honestly didn't realize to the extent that it did until people started polling in this race. I mean, I will admit people had to convince me to do this because I had to understand and believe that I could actually make a difference. But in the course of that, they did polls and they showed me that I was widely known. That I certainly knew I was widely known in my congressional district, but I didn't realize that citywide. One way to look at it is if I was a potential vice president and the president thought highly enough of me to consider me, then obviously I must have some qualifications to be mayor of the city.
An LA Times poll out over the weekend shows Bass in the lead. Remember, here in California, in these kinds of open primaries where both parties can play, somebody has to get at least 50% in the first round, or there's a runoff in November. It looks like Bass and her leading opponent, Rick Caruso, will head to that runoff in November.
Yeah, I want to ask you about Rick Caruso because he's a former Republican turned Democrat. Tell us, what's behind the evolution of how he made this race so competitive?
Well, and in fact, he's a Republican turned independent or no party preference, which is a popular option here in California, and then became a Democrat just in January as he was preparing to launch his campaign, believing that that was going to help him in what is an open primary, but in what is also a very Democratic city. And he has spent about $40 million of his own dollars advertising in English, in Spanish, even in Korean in this town, on the airwaves, selling his message, arguing that he is best equipped to handle the crime wave, the increase in homelessness, the general concerns about how this city is going. And he said spending that money was worth it because he had to get his name out there, unlike professional or long-serving politicians like Karen Bass, who've been in the news for free, essentially, for several years. So we talked to him a little bit about his appeal, and he believes it has a lot to do with the fact that he's somebody who has lived his entire life and built his entire multi-billion-dollar career right here in LA.
When you live here every day, when you're born and raised, when you're not living in Washington, D.C., when you're connected to the community, I've been connected to every part of this community. You feel it in your bones of what's happening in your town. This town is dirty. It's hurting. People feel unheard. They don't have confidence in career politicians anymore. They've given them a chance. And they've given a chance to more progressive ideas. There's been a lot of experiments that have just failed. And they have failed and cost communities and families and businesses. There's a level of frustration in this city that I've been feeling for a number of years. And that's what's happening. You know, people are saying, I'm not worried about ideology. I'm worried about being safe. I'm worried about my kids being able to walk to the park. And I'm not an ideologue. I want to do what's right. I want to wake up every day and say I'm going to do what's right for the city, not what's right for my political career.
So he is the moderate in this race for sure, and he's nipping at the heels of Karen Bass, who says, well, good for him, but if he's spent $40 million and is still trailing me, who's spent just a little over $3 million, then maybe it's not worth the money. Caitlin.
That's so fascinating and really interesting to see some of these themes within the Democratic Party take place in LA, but also translate across in congressional races this year. I want to ask about some of these House races. I mean, obviously, California is a blue state, but when you look at these House races, Republicans feel like they've got a good shot at picking up a few seats on their way to, they hope, claiming the majority after this year's election. Can you take us through some of these battlegrounds? Which of these states should we be, which of these districts should we be looking at in California?
Right. It's not so much out here in California that there are seats that they can add. It's that they've got to hold the ones that they currently have and not lose them to Democrats and give them an opportunity to pick some up. There are a few races to watch. Remember, 70, by our count, 78 congressional districts are holding primaries across the country tonight. Fewer than 20 of them are of the kind that could actually contribute to switching the balance of power, determining the balance of power in the House. And there are a handful here in California. Let's go through them real quick. The first one is the new 22nd Congressional District, represented by Congressman David Valadao, Republican, the first Republican who voted to impeach President Trump, who's facing a primary so far this year. He has conservative challengers. For national Republicans, the hope and expectation is that he stays up on top. If that doesn't happen and the more conservative option prevails, there's a possibility there that a Democrat could win that seat because of the makeup of it has changed. The second one to watch here, California's 40th Congressional District in Orange County. Congresswoman Young Kim, she's a freshman, one of the only women and minority members of the Republican caucus. She too has conservative challengers, had to spend a lot more money than anticipated trying to fend off a Republican challenger. That's a race that is leaning Republican, but if the conservative gets ahead of her and the Democrat gets in the race as well, there's a one Democrats might be able to pick off. And the other one they have their eye on, right here in the LA area, the 27th Congressional District, currently represented by Mike Garcia, a Republican. He's been challenged by Democrat Chrissy Smith in the last two contests they've held to see who represents this seat. There's another Democrat in the mix there. If Democrats place one or two in this race, there's a hope they can get it, because the lines in that district were redrawn in such a way that it went from a net Republican seat to a seat favoring the Democrats in terms of who voted for president in 2020. So a few examples there of the kind of seats that could flip the balance of power in the House. Again, Republicans need to maintain what they have. Democrats are hoping maybe in 1, 2, or 3 of those, depending on the wave, they might be able to pick them up and keep those Republican gains down overall nationwide.
Yeah, and before we let you go, another reason that you're in California is not just for this primary, but the Summit of Americas is taking place there that opened in LA this week. Mexico pulled out over protest over Venezuela and Cuba not being invited. Now, the White House said that dictators don't get invitations, but what are the expectations for this meeting?
We should point out they didn't entirely pull out, but their president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is one of the heads of state who is not attending and sending foreign ministers or other ministers instead. 30 countries total, 8 of them not sending their top leader. Mexico is among them. The 3 Northern Triangle countries as well, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. So the 4 closest southern neighbors to the United States are not sending their presidents, in part because they don't want to become the ire of the Biden administration and the focus when it comes to immigration. In the case of Obrador, López Obrador, it has more to do with Cuba, less to do with the United States. Cuba, as you said, Nicaragua, Venezuela, 3 dictatorships, not democracies, not invited to attend because of that. Mexico, closely aligned with Cuba, basically has to stand up for its island brother nation against the United States in this case. But His foreign minister's coming. He's getting a meeting with the president next month in Washington. And this summit is designed to talk about a handful of things: immigration, health care, and access to COVID vaccinations across a hemisphere and a continent that still needs a lot of them, especially in the poorest of countries, a new economic framework and possible trade agreements later on. Talk about food security, one of the issues that contributes to so much illegal immigration, and then broader conversations about climate change, which is another issue that drives people to head for the American border because they can't grow crops anymore in their home countries. Lots of sort of ephemeral issues to talk about, nothing really solid expected to come of this. And of course, it's happening here in Los Angeles, while so much of Washington will be focused on other matters, including the ongoing gun talks and the January 6th committee hearings that begin Thursday night. Either way, the Biden administration eager to hold this summit and demonstrate that it's on top of things in this hemisphere as well as the other one. Caitlin.
All right, no shortage of news in Los Angeles. Ed O'Keefe, our White House and political correspondent, earning both of those titles on the ground there in Los Angeles with White House visit and these key primaries. Appreciate your time as always, Ed.
Take care.